6:14 a.m., April 9th, 2026. Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico. 4 unmarked vehicles moved in formation through the Colonia Americana district, headlights off. 2 were Mexican federal police units. 2 were HSI liaison vehicles operating under a joint enforcement protocol established 6 weeks earlier. They parked within a half-block radius of a 3-story residential building on Cal Marcela. 14 agents held position. 1 remained on comms with the HSI field office in San Diego, 2,300 kilometers to the north. The man they were looking for had been living under a false identity for over a decade. His real name was on a warrant drafted in 2012 and never served. The warrant had sat in an NCIS administrative archive in Norfolk, Virginia, for 14 years. Not sealed. Not classified. Just inactive. What triggered the operation wasn't new intelligence. It wasn't a tip. It was a routine biometric audit, a database sweep that ran automatically and surfaced a passport application filed in Guadalajara in 2013. The facial recognition match came back at 91% confidence. The analyst who flagged it almost moved on to the next file. Almost. The subject's name in the warrant: Lieutenant Commander David Franko, United States Navy, assigned to Naval Station Norfolk, classified logistics clearance, reported absent without authorization in October 2011. Missing since. What he left behind, and what followed him across the border, took 14 years to fully surface. The investigation that eventually located Franko began not with his case, but with someone else's. In October 2011, a Navy enlisted member stationed at Naval Station Norfolk was convicted of a violent crime against a fellow sailor. The sentencing drew significant attention within the command structure. It moved through the JAG system and landed in the record books. 44 years. 4 days after the verdict, Franko did not report for duty. His quarters showed no sign of struggle. His personal vehicle was in the lot. His service weapon was accounted for. A brief wellness check by base personnel found nothing suggesting immediate self-harm. Command submitted a report classifying his absence as a possible mental health episode and referred the matter to NCIS. NCIS opened an inquiry under their standard desertion protocol. The first investigative phase covered border crossing records, financial account activity, and known associate contacts. No border crossing flagged under his legal name. 1 ATM withdrawal. Norfolk, Virginia, 48 hours before he disappeared. After that, nothing. The inquiry ran for 4 months. In February 2012, a formal warrant for desertion was drafted, signed, filed in the NCIS case management system, and assigned a case number. Then the case went inactive. Budget cycle, caseload volume, no credible lead. Any one of these would have been enough. All 3 applied at once. The case was not closed. The warrant was not withdrawn. It was placed on a shelf where active pursuit was no longer being funded. For 14 years, it sat there. The mechanism that eventually triggered the reinvestigation is worth understanding because it didn't come from NCIS. It came from a separate agency, reviewing a separate data set, looking for something else entirely. HSI, Homeland Security Investigations, maintains what is internally called a biometric watch list, a database of individuals flagged across multiple enforcement contexts, including immigration violations, fraud investigations, outstanding federal warrants, and known aliases. The watch list runs against incoming passport applications, visa filings, and immigration registration records that come through cooperative agreements with foreign governments. Mexico is one of those partners. In January 2026, an HSI analyst in the San Diego field office was processing a backlog of biometric audit returns, routine matches generated by the system and queued for human review. These are not high-priority files. Most resolve immediately. A flagged entry matches a known alias. A passport photo matches a deported individual who reapplied. The analyst clears them and moves on. One file was different. The entry originated from a 2013 Mexican passport application filed in Guadalajara. The applicant had listed a different name, Marcus Delgado Reyes. Place of birth, Tijuana. Occupation, maritime logistics consultant. The application had been processed and approved through Mexican immigration without flag. What the HSI biometric system found was a facial geometry match between the 2013 passport photo and a military personnel record image for Lieutenant Commander David Franko, taken during his service clearance renewal in 2009. The confidence threshold returned by the algorithm, 91, 3%. The analyst flagged the file and cross-referenced the NCIS warrant database. The warrant came back active, drafted February 2012, never executed. 14 years. I went through what the case file documents from that period, and one detail kept coming back. The warrant wasn't expired. It wasn't sealed. It was fully legal and enforceable. It had simply never reached anyone who knew where the subject was. The San Diego analyst forwarded the biometric match to the NCIS liaison desk at the same office. NCIS contacted the Washington field element that maintained the original case. A supervising agent pulled the file, possibly for the first time in over a decade. What he found was intact. The original warrant. The original signed authorization. The original case number. What he did not find was a single active investigative note dated after March 2012. The reinvestigation authorization came through in late January 2026. The language in the internal brief was procedural. Subject of outstanding federal warrant, identified via biometric cross-reference, believed to be residing in Guadalajara, Jalisco, under assumed identity. Standard language. Nothing in it conveyed the full weight of what it described. A United States Navy lieutenant commander with a classified clearance had walked off a federal installation and vanished for 14 years. No one had come close to finding him, until a routine database sweep returned a 91% match on a passport photo. The verification phase lasted 3 weeks. HSI analysts in San Diego worked with DEA liaison officers based in Guadalajara to confirm the biometric match through secondary sources. Mexican immigration records confirmed that Marcos Delgado Reyes had maintained continuous residency in Jalisco since 2013. Employment records, obtained through a formal mutual legal assistance request, showed contract work as a private maritime logistics consultant, primarily serving cargo shipping companies operating out of the port of Manzanillo. The investigators noticed the irony. A Navy logistics officer with a classified clearance had rebuilt his civilian life doing logistics work in a port city. A second biometric confirmation was completed using a surveillance photograph obtained by the DEA liaison team in Guadalajara in late February 2026. The image showed the subject at a street-level cafe in Colonia Americana. The match rate against the 2009 military personnel photo, 94, 1%. That photograph was enough to move the case to the operational planning phase. Here's what doesn't fully add up on the surface. Franko hadn't gone to great lengths to disappear. The alias he assumed, Marcos Delgado Reyes, was documented in public-facing employment records. He had worked, paid taxes under the assumed name, held a recognized professional identity in a legitimate industry. He had not lived off-grid. He had not moved repeatedly. He had been in Guadalajara, in the same neighborhood, for over a decade. The question investigators kept returning to was not how he had hidden. It was why no one had looked. And here's what this case shows about how federal warrant tracking actually works. A warrant that is active but unassigned is, for practical purposes, invisible. It sits in a database. It generates no activity, consumes no resources, creates no investigative momentum. The system will not pursue it until a human being decides to pull the thread. In this case, that human being was an HSI analyst clearing a backlog queue in San Diego. Not because she was assigned to the Franko case, but because the algorithm surfaced his photo while she was looking for something else. The operational planning for the Guadalajara detention was coordinated through HSI San Diego, the DEA Guadalajara Country Office, and the Mexican Fiscalía General de la República, the federal prosecutorial authority responsible for authorizing domestic enforcement actions by foreign law enforcement operating under bilateral agreement. The Joint Operation Protocol required FGR sign-off before any physical contact with the subject. That sign-off came through in late March 2026. The detention was scheduled for April. The operation itself was not complex. Franko was not armed. He was not under active protection. He had no apparent awareness that he had been identified. The surveillance team had established his morning routine over a 6-day observation window. Departure from his residential building between 6 o'clock and 6:30 a.m., consistent route to a nearby cafe, return by 8 a.m. April 9th, 2026, 6:14 a.m. The 4 vehicles moved into position. What the agents could not control was the timing of Franko's departure. He left the building at 6:09 a.m., 5 minutes earlier than on any previous surveillance day. By the time the vehicles were in final position, he was already a half block from his building, walking east on Cal Marcela. The operation adjusted within 90 seconds. 2 Mexican federal agents moved to intercept on foot. 2 HSI personnel maintained vehicle positions to prevent exit from the block. The contact was made at street level, in clear morning light, in front of approximately 4 civilian bystanders. Franko did not run. He stopped. He looked at the 2 approaching agents. He asked, in Spanish, if there was a problem. One of the Mexican federal agents responded. Franko was asked to provide identification. He produced a Mexican national identity document in the name of Marcos Delgado Reyes. He was detained without physical resistance. An HSI agent presented credentials and informed him, in English, that he was subject to a United States federal warrant. The first words Franko said in English, according to the incident report, were, "What took you so long?" He was transported to a federal holding facility in Guadalajara. The NCIS liaison in San Diego was notified at 6:31 a.m. local time. Extradition proceedings began in May 2026. The legal framework for extraditing a U.S. citizen apprehended abroad under an existing federal warrant is straightforward in principle and administratively intensive in practice. The 1978 United States-Mexico extradition treaty covers military desertion when accompanied by a federal civilian warrant. Franko's 2012 NCIS warrant qualified. The diplomatic channel required formal certification of the warrant's validity, a process that involved JAG review, State Department coordination, and submission to the Mexican Secretaría de Relación Exteriores. The certification review ran for approximately 7 weeks. What was most surprising about this case isn't the bureaucratic delay, it's what the review process turned up. When JAG pulled the original case file for certification purposes, they found that Franko's timeline of departure had never been fully reconstructed. NCIS had confirmed his last duty appearance and his last known ATM use. What they had not documented, because the inquiry was deprioritized before they had the resources to do it, was how he crossed the border. He did not cross under his legal name. That much had been established in 2012. What the 2026 review confirmed, through analysis of historical immigration databases and financial records obtained under the extradition process, was that Franko had used a fraudulently obtained Mexican tourist visa acquired through an intermediary in Laredo, Texas, in November 2011. The visa was issued under the name Marco Delgado, a slight variation from the passport alias he would later adopt in 2013, and stamped at the Nuevo Laredo land crossing on November 19, 2011. He had been in Mexico for 42 days before the original NCIS inquiry closed. The intermediary in Laredo has not been identified. That thread remains open. The 14-year gap in this case is not primarily a failure of any individual investigator. It's a structural failure in how the federal warrant system allocates attention. A warrant without an assigned investigative team is a bureaucratic artifact, not an enforcement instrument. Franko was findable. The biometric match came back at 91% on a 2013 photo using 2009 source data. That technology existed, in some form, years before 2026. What didn't exist, or wasn't applied, was a systematic review process for inactive warrants. The case didn't go cold because the trail disappeared. It went cold because no one was walking it. What do you think? Did the system fail here, or is this what institutional triage looks like when resources are finite? The formal extradition order was issued by the Mexican federal court on June 3, 2026. Franko was transferred to U.S. custody on June 11, 2026, at a border crossing in Nogales, Arizona. Consider the position of the NCIS agent who flew to Nogales to take custody that morning. He had not worked the original 2012 case. He had been assigned as the certifying agent for the extradition because he had the relevant liaison credentials. He received the case file electronically, read through it on the flight, and walked into that handover carrying 14 years of someone else's incomplete work. The original warrant, drafted in February 2012, signed, filed, and never executed, was formally served at 9:47 a.m. on June 11, 2026, 14 years and 4 months after it was written. Franko was charged under the Uniform Code of Military Justice for unauthorized absence exceeding 30 days, compounded by additional federal charges related to identity fraud and use of fraudulent documentation to obtain immigration status. The UCMJ charge carries a potential sentence of up to 5 years. The federal fraud charges carry additional exposure. At the time of transfer, Franko was 52 years old. He had spent his entire adult career in the United States Navy. He had held a classified clearance. According to his service record, he had received commendations for logistics planning during 2 deployment cycles. He had also spent the better part of his 50s working as a maritime logistics consultant under a false name in a Mexican port city, watching container ships move in and out of the harbour. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for July 2026. At the time this record was compiled, the full legal proceedings were ongoing. There's a line in the NCIS case reactivation brief, a single sentence in the administrative summary, that stays with you. Subject maintained continuous employment in maritime logistics throughout the period of unauthorized absence, utilizing skills acquired during federal service. The Navy trained him. He used that training for 14 years in a country that didn't know who he was. Several things in this case remain unresolved and likely will stay that way. The Laredo intermediary, the individual or network that provided Franko with fraudulent Mexican documentation in November 2011, has not been identified. HSI noted in their operational summary that the documentation method Franko used in 2011 was consistent with a pattern associated with document fraud operations in the Laredo-Nuevo Laredo corridor, but no active investigation targeting that network was underway as of June 2026. The full scope of Franko's logistics work in Mexico has not been audited. His employment records show contract work for legitimate registered cargo companies. Whether any of that work involved contact with entities of law enforcement interest. Cartel-adjacent logistics operations are active in the Port of Manzanillo corridor, has not been publicly addressed. The extradition agreement with Mexico covered his UCMJ and federal fraud charges. It did not establish jurisdiction for any potential Mexican side investigation. The circumstances that led to his initial disappearance. The specific relationship between his departure and the high-profile naval conviction 4 days earlier have not been officially characterized. Franko's departure was treated, from the beginning, as desertion. No connection between his absence and the underlying case that preceded it was ever formally established. Whether one existed is something the legal proceedings may or may not surface. The NCIS case number assigned in 2012 was formally closed in June 2026. The warrant was marked served. The file was updated for the first time in 14 years. What the closure documents don't address, because they don't have to, is how many files like it are still sitting in that database. Active warrants. Inactive pursuits. Cases where the trail went quiet, not because the subject disappeared completely, but because no one was assigned to keep looking. The biometric system that found Franko found him because an analyst was clearing a backlog queue. It found him because a 2013 passport photo happened to be in a Mexican database that happened to be covered by a bilateral data sharing agreement that happened to be in effect. One analyst. One flagged file. One algorithm running overnight. The network that allowed a credentialed Navy officer to walk across the border, assume a new name, and rebuild a professional life in a foreign country has not been dismantled. The demand for the documentation services it provides still exists. The corridor is still open. Franko is in custody. The case that found him is closed. The shelf it sat on for 14 years still has other files on it. If you've followed cases like this one, cold warrants, fugitive recoveries, the intersection of military accountability and federal enforcement, subscribe. The next file we open runs along the same shelf. What we cut from this story for time. The full reconstruction of Franko's document chain from 2011 to 2013. If you want part 2, comment more.